This evening we have with us one of the leading theologians of our time. He's the founder of the University of Creation Spirituality, a best-selling author, and a recent recipient of the Courage of Conscience Award by the Peace Abbey of Sherborne, Massachusetts. Other recipients of this prestigious award include the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, and Rosa Parks. So let's warmly welcome Matthew Fox.
So here we gather at the time of Hanukkah. Last night was the last night of the 8-day Hanukkah feast for the Jewish people. And of course this is the middle of Advent for Christian people, the coming of the Christmas event. And it is the coming of solstice, the darkest time of the year, which also happens to be December 21st, my birthday. But we won't draw any conclusions from that. I've been asked to speak on the topic of awe and liberation. This past week, it was drawn to my attention that there was an advertisement on television in the continental states. Maybe you people were spared it, I don't know. But it had something to do with one version of what Christmas is about, because it was a sales ad trying to sell a new form of monopoly where you are traveling through a shopping mall in this game. You see, they're selling this game about how to travel through a shopping mall successfully. And the woman who was pitching the game, her operative line was, "I was born to shop." I was born to shop. Now, I think that's a particular philosophy that we should pay attention to, because it may in fact summarize the last 300 years of Western civilization. It may explain a lot of what's been going on in terms of the destruction of the indigenous people on this island and all the other islands, including the Turtle Island of the continental United States, for the last 300 or 400 years. The people came here to shop. They came to the Americas to take the gold and the silver and the slaves. And the same was true in the history of Australia and Africa and parts of Asia. So I think that the question raised by this ad is significant. Why were we born? Why were we born? And that is why the archetypal power of Christmas is everybody's. You don't have to be a Christian to be disturbed by the question, why are children born? And I do think that it's possible that both the historical Jesus and the Christ may have a different version of why they were born than that they were born to shop. I think the clue to this lies in a sentence by Rabbi Abraham Heschel, when he said, "Forfeit your sense of awe. Forfeit your sense of awe, and the universe becomes a marketplace for you." Forfeit your sense of awe, and the universe becomes a marketplace for you. Maybe this effort on the part of our civilization to reduce living to shopping and its concomitant implications, maybe this has something to do with the loss of a cosmology. Forfeit your sense of awe and the universe. There are three words in there: awe, universe, and marketplace. There is a relationship between cosmology, or a sense of the universe, and awe. And an anthropocentric, a human-centered civilization loses that sense of universe, therefore a sense of awe, therefore it's all about shopping one way or the other. One way, I think, to understand the move from the modern era to the postmodern era, and this is one way of naming the times in which we live. The way I name the move from modern to postmodern is from text to context. The modern age began with the invention of the printing press in the 15th century. The same century in which Columbus left Europe and started the invasion, they called it a discovery, the invasion of indigenous peoples around the world. The Protestant Reformation was a religious response to the modern era and the modern invention of the printing press. And it carried great positive weight with it, because it, among other things, put the Bible in the hands of lay people, took it away from an elite class, and so forth. And of course, the spread of literacy, other advantages of textual consciousness had its positive role to play. However, as we became more and more text-oriented, we became narrower and narrower and more anthropocentric. We lost our hearing. Indeed, Thomas Berry, one of the prophets of our time, called himself a geologian, not a theologian, though he's a Catholic priest, says that our civilization has become autistic. We no longer relate to the other beings, to the other creatures. We are, he says, his generation, he's a man about 80 years old now, his generation became autistic. We became so text-oriented. What is the operative shibboleth in capitalism? Quote, the bottom line, unquote. There's a textual bias in capitalism. It's about numbers. It's about the numerical, arithmetic text. Our religious worship is boring and inoperative and ineffective and without power, to the extent that it's about reading and being read to, as if prayer is found in a textbook and not in the human heart someplace. Or the extreme of this pathology is found in fundamentalism, which is that somehow inside of a book, English translation of course, are all the answers. Even though the book is 2,000 years old, the English translation is probably 200 years old, and the book of the universe is 15 billion years old. And God poured her grace into that book of nature for 15 billion years before it ever occurred, a mere few thousand years ago, to start reading these stories. St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century said, Revelation comes in 2 volumes, nature and the Bible. But we have forgotten the nature part of Revelation. Go to any seminary in the West today, rabbinic, Protestant, Catholic, Anglican, and ask them this question. Do you people teach our spiritual leaders to be about the revelation from nature? And if so, how many physicists do you have in your faculty? And how many biologists who are laying bare, unveiling the grace of nature to these young wannabe spiritual leaders? You check it out. Why do we have so many more biblical scholars than nature scholars in our seminary systems? It's a conspiracy of anthropocentrism. The strength of Protestantism is also its weakness, that it has existed only during the modern era, only during this textual era. And it is being invited today to break through into the pre-modern era, because that is part of postmodernism, to honor the wisdom of the pre-modern people. No one could suggest for a moment that the modern era recognized the wisdom of the pre-modern people. There was an arrogance about the people who sailed from Europe in the 15th and 16th century, whether they be Protestant missionaries or Columbus's people or Jesuit priests of the century later. There was an arrogance that Europe was coming to redeem these people. This arrogance comes from the fact that Europe had already lost its cosmology. It had already lost its mystical tradition, the tradition of the cosmic Christ in Christianity, by the 16th century. From text to context. Something about being on your island. I just arrived a few hours ago. It's not the first time that I've been blessed to be here. There's something about these islands called Hawaii, which is contextual. Contextual, not textual. I asked when I said, do you have any of my books for sale tonight? No. I said, well, no, that may be Hawaiian. You know, that you're more interested in the context than the text. You can go out and read. You can read the, yes, the smells.
Give us away.
and the sky and the stars and the sea and the weather and the climate and the soil that you are still contextually related to here. People who drove me in tonight said, they live up at the mountain range here. They said, we don't even want to go down into that city. Seen one city, you've seen them all. They want to live in a context. That's a good thing. That's about cosmology. When we know our context, we know our role. We know why we were born. We know why we are here. Context is about relations, about relationships. The Lakota people, the indigenous people in the Midwest, whenever they pray with their sacred pipe, they say, Ahomatakiasi, which means all our relations. That is what spirituality is about, all our relations. It's about context. The textual era of the modern era was not a spiritual era. It was a very heavily religious era, where in the name of religion we went to war, Protestant against Protestant, Catholic against Protestant, Protestant against Catholic, everyone against the Jews, everyone against the indigenous people, all this war in the name of religion. But mysticism went into the closet. Theodore Rosak, in his fine book on eco-psychology, says the Enlightenment, the modern era, held mysticism up for ridicule as a worse offense against science and reason. So not only was mysticism in the closet during the modern textual era, but it was held up for ridicule. When I went through the seminary in the 60s, we did not have one course on the mystics. And Meister Eckhart, the greatest mystic the West has ever produced, who was a Dominican, and this was a Dominican seminary I was in, was never even mentioned in 12 years of training. I was talking to a rabbi the other day, went through the seminary in the 70s. He said, I kept asking the professors, teach me my Jewish mystical roots. They were scared to death. They had PhDs in left brain theology, not in mysticism. They wouldn't touch their mystical tradition. You know what the guy did when he graduated from the seminary, this rabbi? He went to India to study with Rajneesh for 3 years. Came back, started his own synagogue, got expelled. Now I've hired him in our university. And of course, with Protestants, it's even worse. At least 50 Protestant and Anglican ministers have told me in the last 25 years, the only sentence we heard about mysticism in the seminary was that it begins with mist and ends in schism. And in the middle is a big I. Yeah, that's the put down of our cosmological tradition. Because mysticism, my friends, is about the psyche and the cosmos coming together. Microcosm, macrocosm. And if we don't have that, we forfeit our sense of awe, and the universe becomes a marketplace for us. And we go around telling people in public, quote, I was born to shop, unquote. We trivialize our existence. And what's even more egregious, we trivialize the existence of our young people. And they are feeling it everywhere in the world today. There is despair among the young for good reason. Not only because there is no promise whatsoever of good work, even if they do well in college, That even if you get a job these days, there's no promise that the organization that hired you will be loyal to you. Just this morning in San Francisco, in the paper in San Francisco, headlines, Bank of America is throwing out 3,600 workers in the Bay Area. And they've made more money last year than ever. It's not that they're on hard times. That there's no moral commitment to the spiritual need to provide decent employment. So I think when I come to Hawaii of this place and its beauty, and of course how can I miss it, being surrounded by two beautiful ladies like these. So generous is nature here. The first time I went to Hawaii, I'll never forget the scene. It was a metaphor for me, I've never forgotten. We were going down a highway, it was in Honolulu area, and they had a chain gang out there. These big, strong men and chained to each other in their prison outfits, hacking away at the vines that were growing out to take over the highway. For me, that was such a metaphor of the power of nature, the power of the universe, and the puniness of human nature. That we put up these marvelous highways, marvelous in the sense of efficient, and yet here in Hawaii anyway, you have to hire chain gangs to try to keep these highways clear. It reminded me of this truth that I was taught several years ago by scientists, that if you take an inch-wide piece of metal and put it around a young watermelon growing, inch-wide piece of metal around a watermelon, the watermelon will break that metal as it grows. Amazing. The generosity, the power, the desire built into nature. And let us not forget, we humans are part of nature. This is why we must not settle for the trivial options of living that a purely market-oriented civilization would put on us. We were made for bigger things. We have to get to that sense of desire, of yearning. They say the difference between religion and spirituality is yearning. Now, of course, there doesn't have to be a split between religion and spirituality. In a healthy world, in a healthy culture, religion is about spirituality. It's about bringing forward the traditions of our ancestors to make the spirit alive. But I dare say that our civilization, in its pursuit of texts, has separated religion from spirituality, justice from law, learning from education, and stewardship from economics. And except for that, we're in terrific shape. And so it's so easy to meditate on your islands here about the sacredness of the place and the generosity of the place. And to remind ourselves that context will mean the capacity for sustainability. Text is not about sustainability because text narrows the picture so much. But also on these islands, when meditating any sense of place, we have to remember the pain and the bloodshed and the genocide and the racism that are also a deep part of the land here. And of course, the destruction of the earth and of the waters and of the fishes that goes on here as it is going on everywhere in the world today. There's a wonderful book that came out a year ago by David Abrams called The Spell of the Sensuous. Have any of you heard of this book? Spell of the Sensuous. David Abrams is a very interesting guy. He started life as a magician, of all things. Then he went to the islands, not these islands, but further islands in the South Pacific. He was looking for the shamanism in the islands and wondering, did his sense of magic have anything to do with what shamans do? And he had a real spiritual awakening while he was there. And then he's been living in the desert in Arizona for years, and this is his first book, The Spell of the Sensuous. It's a very powerful book. And this is how he begins it. It's a beautiful statement on context. because it's a statement on how we humans are made for relationship. Not for the trivial, not for the text, but for the context. He writes, humans are tuned for relationship. The eyes, the skin, the tongue, the ears and nostrils, all are gates where our body receives the refreshment of otherness. This landscape of shadowed voices, these weathered bodies and antlers and tumbling streams, these breathing shapes are our family. The beings with whom we are engaged, with whom we struggle and suffer and celebrate. For the largest part of the species' existence, humans have negotiated relationships with every aspect of the sensuous surroundings, exchanging possibilities with every flapping form, with each textured surface and shivering entity that we happen to focus upon. All could speak. All could speak. Articulating as gesture and whistle and sigh a shifting web of meanings that we under our skin, took into our skin or inhaled through our nostrils or focused with our listening ears, and to which we replied, whether with sounds or movement or minute shifts of mood. The color of sky, the rush of waves, every aspect of the earthly sensuous could draw us into a relationship fed with curiosity and spiced with danger. That is our inheritance, my friends. He's right. This is how all people lived until the time of the text, until the idolatry of the anthropocentric, because only humans live by texts and kill by them. Recently I was in a conference in LA on body, soul, and spirit, and just before I spoke, Dean Ornish spoke, the medical doctor who's been working with heart attack victims and has proven finally to the scientific establishment, using scientific language and criteria and texts, that the key to heart attack recovery is lifestyle, otherwise known as spirituality, but we won't use that word. But in his talk, Ornish made he used this one phrase that I wrote down. He talked about the epidemic of loneliness. The epidemic of loneliness that is causing the heart attacks. I was on a panel with this woman, this woman from the East Coast who did this good book on the mystery of the women's bodies. What's her name?
Carolyn Mace.
No, not Carolyn Mace. Christine Northrup. Yeah. And she talked about how she's convinced, after working with breast cancer patients for 20-some years, that the real issue is a heart chakra issue. And if you work with men and heart attacks, it's the same thing. Our hearts are not being nourished. We are undergoing this epidemic of loneliness. All this is about, my friends, the lack of cosmology, the anthropocentrism that is weighing so heavily on our spirits. And has everything to do with the ecological crisis. Because if you're not in relationship with the forest, it's happening right now in Northern California, the headlands crisis. These are the oldest virgin redwood forests standing in the world today. 95% of California's redwood forests have been destroyed. 95%. These are 5% remaining, and a Texan billionaire thinks he, quote, owns them, unquote, and is wanting to cut them down, etc., etc. There's a big clash going on there. It's something we've been hearing about for a couple centuries, the same attitude. And it's all because we don't have relationship. This billionaire's relationships are all with his billions. And with the texts that go with that. His stock text and his bond text and his tax text and all these texts that we can get swamped into. His context is missing. So we meet in a place, a sacred place called Hawaii, and all our places are sacred, but this is especially egregious for its generosity. There's a wonderful line in St. Thomas Aquinas. He says, all beauty yearns to be conspicuous. Wonderful line. All beauty yearns to be conspicuous. There's obvious to anyone how conspicuous the beauty is on these islands. But we also meet in a certain time, a time of Hanukkah, of Advent, of solstice, and of Christmas. And of course, all these times from different spiritual traditions share the same insight. And that is that December in the Northern Hemisphere is a time to turn on your lights, to start lighting candles. The Hanukkah candles, the Advent candle, the pagan lighting that comes with the solstice, and of course the Christ story of the pagan astrologers, the pagan scientists who followed a light, who followed a star. Now today's biblical scholars who spend their lives with texts have made clear to us that the Christmas story is not about the historical Jesus. It's not accurate. This is not history. It is myth, we are told. And that's fine with me, because I think that myth is often far more interesting than history. There's more room for the mystery in myth than there is in history, and especially if our historians are only text-trained and text-oriented, and especially if our theologians are, for the most part, text-oriented. And so the news coming out from the Quest for the Historical Jesus work by the biblical scholars, I think, is very liberating. They're telling us now that about 20% of the Gospels represent the words of Jesus. What's the other 80%? That's what I find interesting. And all the Christmas stories are in that other 80%. The other 80%, my friends, is about the cosmic Christ. The cosmic Christ. And Jesus himself was trying to teach us about the cosmic Christ. That is to say that we are all sons and daughters of God. That we are all other Christs. In the Buddhist tradition, the same thing is taught, that the Buddha nature is in every flower. And in every smile in a baby's face. It's the same teaching everywhere, check it out. When you get into the mystical teachings, and don't just stay at the surface of theology and religion, you have with Father B. Griffith, the recent monk who died a year ago, who spent 50 years in India running an ashram. There was half Hindu and half Christian. He used to say, if you look at the religions, say there are 5 religions in the world, more than that, but look at this way. If you look at them, at their upper stratum, it looks like 5 different entities, fighting each other, being different and all that. But if you go deep, you come to a common center. The image I use is that from Meister Eckhart, who says God is a great underground river that no one can dam up and no one can stop. And based on that image of divinity as an underground river, I see there are many wells into that river. There's a Buddhist well, and a Taoist well, and a Christian well, and a Sufi well, and a Jewish well, and a goddess well, and indigenous wells. If you go down your well, you will come to the common waters of wisdom. Buddha did it, and Jesus did it, and Isaiah did it, and Rumi did it, and Gandhi did it, and Sojourner Truth did it, and Dorothy Day did it. It's about depth. And this is why I talk about deep ecumenism. If we go into the depth of our spiritual traditions, we will find that we have far more in common in terms of the experience of the divine. Now, we can celebrate how this season of Advent is a waiting time, and which often happens in the dark, the waiting time, the gestation time. And the solstice is a waiting time, waiting for the sun to turn the corner, so to speak. So this darkest time of the year begins finally, the sun begins to emerge on December 21st as the beginning of light again. And of course, the early Christians were far more cosmological than our text-oriented theologians of the last 300 years, and they were totally attuned to nature and cosmology. And of course, Jesus wasn't born on December 25th, but these people were smart enough to know That their experience of the Christ in Jesus was about light coming in the darkness, a darkness that could not overcome it. And therefore, they put Jesus' birth at this time of the year smartly and wisely, and plugging it in to the pagan wisdom, because the early Christians were not pagan-phobic. That was a more recent disease for which we need profound liberation. Remember, the word pagan is a Latin word. Paganus means simply country person, rural person. Given this understanding of what pagan means, Jesus himself was a pagan, because Jesus was not a city person. In fact, he got killed in the city, if you remember rightly. He grew up in a town. And he wandered the fields because his job as a dutiful son was to sell farm implements that his father, carpenter, made to farmers. Because in Jesus' day, in Palestine, carpenters did not make furniture for middle-class people out of wood. What they made was farm implements. Jesus' father was making farm implements, and Jesus was selling these farm implements to farmers. And this is why you check out the authentic words of Jesus that the scholars can tell us were his words, are all about nature. Check it out. It's about sparrows and fishes and sheep and goats and mustard seeds and bushes and trees and leaven. It's all about cosmology. Jesus was not textually oriented. In fact, Jesus never quotes, the historical Jesus never quotes from the scriptures. Don't tell anyone. Let me say it again. The historical Jesus never quotes from the scriptures. If you take what these biblical scholars are finding about the historical Jesus, any quotes in the scriptures there are not by the historical Jesus. He was not a text-toting preacher. His text was a context of people's lives, and the context of how human life related to the grace of the rest of God's creation. Indeed, the word in the scriptures that we translate as kingdom of God, basileia, can in fact, as Christa Stendhal, the great Lutheran theologian, said, has every right to be translated as creation. The kingdom and queendom of God is creation itself. That is the primary teaching of the historical Jesus. And when he said, the kingdom of God is among you, he was saying you don't have to get on a plane to go to Maui, or the other way around, to go to Los Angeles to find the kingdom of God. You just have to wake up. It is everywhere. The issue is our perception. What are we tuning into? I had a dream this past year, and it was there was a sentence, an operative sentence in it, and I don't usually get a dream with the whole sentence in it. It's a good sentence. It said, there is nothing wrong with the human species today except one thing. We have lost the sense of the sacred. Nothing wrong with human species today except one thing. We've lost the sense of the sacred. This is what awe is all about. Awe is about being struck by something greater than yourself. The sense of the sacred. We must acknowledge when it comes to time in which we live, that ours are, while in the liturgical sense, we talk about Advent and Hanukkah and Christmas and solstice as light coming in the darkness, ours are also a time of dying. Ours are a dying time. One scientist says we are living in an extinction spasm greater than any time in the last 60 million years on this planet. An extinction spasm greater than any time since the dinosaurs disappeared. But the extinctions that are going on, 27,000 species every year, and at this rate of extinction spasm, in 50 years there will be no species. That's what's going on in our time. That's why we must not trivialize our lives or our responsibilities. And this is why many young people know these facts and are looking to themselves and to elders for some wisdom about what we do about this suicidal path that we are on. Where will we be 50 years from now? If there are no species, what will we eat? Where will our poetry come from? What will we sing about and chant about? Lester Brown of the World Watch Institute says we have 15 years left to change our ways as a species. And the path we're on, if we cannot change it the next 15 years, we will not be able to undo the inestimable damage and extinction that we are involved in. And so we have to pay attention at this Hanukkah time, because Hanukkah is a time of liberation. It was a time of the Jewish people throwing over their colonial oppressors, who were the Greeks at that particular time. And that is the real miracle of Hanukkah. That yes, the light was perpetuated in the temple for 8 days, even though it was physically impossible that it be perpetuated for more than one. But the real miracle was the capacity of this tiny people to throw off an empire that was oppressing them. And this, of course, is behind the story of Christmas too. And how cosmological that story is. And this, my friends, is the key to awe. Awe comes from cosmology. It doesn't come from Dan Rather's news report in the evening. It doesn't come from the anthropocentric news that comes our way in our culture on a daily basis. If you only read the human newspaper every day, you would be in despair, and have a right to be in despair, because human history by itself is not real hopeful. It is when we can plug into the context, the bigger picture, that hope arises in your heart. And this is what all spiritual leaders have been able to do, whether Isaiah or Jesus or Buddha or Lao Tzu or Gandhi or King or Dorothy Day or who have you, to tap into the bigger context. And so let's take a look at that context that can help us into awe. Let me begin with the story of Christmas, the cosmic Christ being born in a stable. I alluded to the star. That's quite a cosmological event. And the angels who appear all over the Christmas stories. Angels in the Mediterranean time of the 2,000 years ago. Angels meant those invisible powers that push the planets, push the galaxies, if you will. The spirits that make the universe happen and go around, the governing spirits of the universe, working out the work of the Creator. So whenever there are angels in the Bible, we are dealing with cosmological beings. Of course, today now we're having a return of the angels, because they're moving from modern to postmodern. In the industrial machine age, and modern age, remember, was characterized by machine. We were taught the universe was a machine. There's no room for angels in a machine. But now they're moving beyond machine. There is room for spirits to re-enter. Indeed, my most recent book I did with Rupert Sheldrake, a British scientist, called The Physics of Angels. And it's not been too many scientists or theologians during the modern era who have wanted to write about angels. But they're coming back. Move over. And then there are the shepherds who play such a role in the Christmas story. Shepherds are people very close to the earth. I lived with shepherds in the Basque country for many months when I was living in a Basque farm writing my doctoral thesis in the late 60s. And I got to know what shepherd life is like. You become sheep-like. You don't have a watch. Your time of day is determined by the sheep. And you begin to smell at them when you hang out with them. And you're not real, what should I say, welcome back into the human community. So even in the time of the Gospels, 2,000 years ago, the shepherds were low in the totem pole of class privilege. And so shepherds are close to the four-legged ones. Cosmological. And then the Magi, who were pagan scientists, let me make clear, pagan scientists, not Jewish prophets, but pagan scientists, followed a star to a manger. And what is a manger? A trough where the animals feed. And that story comes from Isaiah 1, the very first chapter, first verse of Isaiah, that says, Israel has not known me, but the ox and the donkey have known me. That the Creator puts it out there that the four-legged ones may be far closer to God than the so-called people of God are. Something to remember. Something the indigenous people have never forgotten. It's present in their creation stories. You know the Apache creation story that says that first God created dogs, then dogs were lonely. You have it. So God created humans. God created humans. We are here to befriend the dog. It's different from shopping, isn't it? But the native creation stories in general of our land, of the Americas, agree on this point. That the humans are not only last to come along in the creation, evolution or story or history, but that in fact they are the most dangerous of all the species. They are the ones that are least trustworthy. So all this talk of animals, angels, shepherds, stars, and of course genealogy. Matthew's gospel begins with this whole genealogy tracing Jesus back to Adam. It's all about the history of the universe. They're trying to get at the history of the universe. It's all cosmology, because cosmology is about space and time. And it's about origins, how we got here, and what is here. Where are we? And of course, part of the creation story is the angels singing to the shepherds. And notice the shepherds are the first to get the news. And what is the word out of the angels' mouth? Glory, doxa, which is that divine radiance we find in all beings. Glory to God in the highest, and peace to all people of goodwill. It doesn't say, the angels did not say, and peace to Christians, peace to those who are baptized, peace to those who can quote scripture back in a hurry. That is not the tradition of wisdom literature in the Hebrew Bible. Wisdom literature is universalist. All people are brought into this mystery of the cosmic Christ. And of course, it is the mystery of the divine child. There is the archetype that no one can turn their back on. The return of the puer, the return of the puella, that the child in us, that is the mystic in you and me. The mystic is the child that wants to play in the universe, as we have in the book of Proverbs. Wisdom saying, I was by God's side, a master craftsperson, playing with God day after day, ever at play in the universe. The return of Eros. The return of the love of life. The return of play. Why do you people go out and swim with dolphins? To bring back, maybe, the sense that it's okay to play. My spiritual director for 17 years was a dog, and he taught me that right up to the end. I didn't get that from my Dominican training. I got other things from my Dominican training, for which I'm very grateful, but I had to turn to a dog to rediscover the centrality of ecstasy and the right of ecstasy to our heart work. David Bohm, the physicist who died a few years ago, said, and I quote, I am proposing a postmodern physics that begins with the whole, W-H-O-L-E. I am proposing a postmodern physics that begins with the whole. If that is what postmodern physics is about, that is also what postmodern religion is about. To re-begin with the whole, the sense of cosmology. Cosmos is a Greek word for whole, W-H-O-L-E. Context, again. There's a wonderful passage in Madge Midley's book, Beast and Man, where she talks about the, again, I alluded to the psychic response to the cosmos, to the whole, the microcosm, macrocosm. She puts it this way. We need a vast world, and it must be a world that does not need us. A world constantly capable of surprising us. A world we did not program, since only such a world is a proper object of wonder. This is where awe comes from. Wonder comes from something vaster than us that we are not in control of. That's what cosmology is all about. That's what it does for the human heart. St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century said, spirit means our capacity to relate to the totality of things. Wow! That means spirit and cosmology are the same thing. And when a new cosmology comes along and sweeps us up, pardon me, and that is happening in our time, it's sweeping scientists up, making mystics of them. So that there's a far greater percentage of scientists who are mystics today than, for example, bishops. When this happens, that cosmology comes alive again, then spirit comes alive again. And religion has the opportunity to reinvent itself, to reconnect to its authentic origins. Let me tell you a very recent story. Last week, this week, I was on television. It was one of these live programs. I was in San Francisco. The program was from New York. So, I sat in a studio there, and then they hooked us up. And it was at noon, and it was a program, something about God is no longer dead. And they had taken a poll, NBC had taken a poll from people, and they discovered that there's just between religion and spirituality. A lot of people are just spirituality today. And like 92% of Americans believe in a creator God, and 88% pray or something like that. So they went on. And they had this fellow on there from Columbia University, and he had done it for himself as an Orthodox Jew and a religious journalist. And he said, well, we all know that religion means, religare means, etymologically, to bind back. And this means, therefore, he said, that we bind back to our religious tradition. And he said, this is why our traditions will never get together. And we tried it at Columbia University, and it's not possible to get our different traditions together. I'm an Orthodox Jew, and nothing's going to change that. Religion means I go back to my tradition. Well, they finally let me into the conversation, and I said, yes, religare does mean to bind back, but it doesn't mean to bind back to your religious tradition. Our religious traditions are 2,000 to 3,000 years old. Give God a break, It means to bind back to the origin of the universe, where all was one, when all was in the heart of God. It means to bind back to the mind and the heart of the Divine One. And this is what is happening to scientists as they rediscover the mystery in the microcosm of the universe and the mystery in the macrocosm. Wonder is being elicited again, and awe. And as Rabbi Heschel says, awe is the beginning of wisdom. The modern era, the textual era, the industrial era, the machine era was all about knowledge. It was not about wisdom. This is why we did not recognize the wisdom in the native people. When we found it, we were not interested in wisdom. Wisdom is a feminine thing. Sophia, Lady Wisdom. Indeed, and interestingly enough, and to the shock of many Christians, the first name given Jesus in the New Testament was Sophia, Lady Wisdom. Now, within a generation, they put a cap on that and called it Logos. But anyway, the first generation, it was Lady Wisdom. And you think this didn't blow the tubes of the Roman Empire and the Jewish theological establishment of the time, then you don't know why Jesus was crucified. The women got it. The women got it. It was women and slaves who first followed Jesus, not textual exegetes. But Tao Te Ching, the Chinese scriptures say, just realize where you come from. This is the essence of wisdom. See, the same call to cosmology. Realize where you come from. See, find your origin. Find your context. It's in this context then that we rediscover the sacred, and we find that all of the history that has brought us here has been blessing and sacred. That has not been without turmoil and struggle and danger and terror. Beauty and terror go together. What is pretty is devoid of terror, but what is beautiful always includes terror. How did Rilke the poet put it? He said, every angel is terrifying. Every angel is terrifying. That's quite different from the characterization that we have of angels during the modern era are these bare-bottom little cherub baby things that you want to pinch in the butt. They have nothing to do with being afraid. It's clear that there's been a trivializing of angels during the modern era. The Baroque era reduced the terror of angel. If you check it out in the Bible, practically every time an angel appears, the first word is, "Do not be afraid." That's what the angel said to Mary. Now, can that happen with one of these little bare-bottom cherub things we've been staring at for 300 years? It's not about fear. It's about sentimentalizing. No, the real angels are about big things. They are about big things. They have something to do with the cosmic forces. And they're looking our way. They're looking our way. Hildegard of Bingen has this amazing teaching about angels. She says, angels praise the good works of humans. And they marvel at the work of humans. Because angels can only do one thing their whole life long. But we humans, every day we get up, we're free to choose a new thing, if we want to. We have much more freedom than angels because we've got time and we've got bodies. Of course, we have less time, but we do have time. It's compressed time, urging us on. So cosmology is about a relationship to the whole. And the new cosmology from science is a great affirmation of the wonder that is beneath every atom in our body. Knowing that, 40 to 60% of the hydrogen atoms in your body were present in the universe a few seconds after the original fireball. Let me say that again. 40 to 60% of the hydrogen atoms in your body have been here for 15 billion years. So, if you feel tired, you need a nap once in a while, take it. It's your hydrogen atom saying, hey, I've been around a while. We're connected, folks. That's our context. That's our context. I think that's much more interesting than shopping. I don't know the full implications of that fact. But the reason I don't know it is that so few elders have ever led me into rituals and into practices to dance with the hydrogen atoms and to ask them what they want of us and why we're here. And to know that every element in our body, the hydrogen and the oxygen, the sulfur and the carbon and the magnesium, was born in supernova explosions 5.5 billion years ago. That's interesting. That's connection. That's context. There's so much knowledge out there now that can lead to wisdom. And it can open our hearts. That's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom has to do with opening the heart. And that takes us then to the second theme, that theme of liberation. Awe and liberation, gifts of creation spirituality. It is only, I think, when we can reconnect to the sources of awe and wonder. And interestingly, Thomas Aquinas says God is a source without a source. It's the wonderful naming of divinity. When we can reconnect to the source, which happens in meditation, which happens in study, science that includes the heart and not just the mind, that happens in all our relations. This return to the source can happen in all our relations. Because everyone we encounter has a 15 billion year history. Not just the person you see in the mirror in the morning. And everyone you encounter is a cosmic Christ. Glows and glistens with the brilliance of the image of God. Once we make those connections, there's no longer an excuse for being lonely. And then, there's no longer an excuse for being disempowered. And for allowing that inherent passion for justice that is in all of our guts and hearts, for allowing that to dry up. No longer an excuse for being couch potatoes. Our culture, I think, has consciously or unconsciously committed itself to rendering the majority of its citizens into couch potatoitis. Passivity, when it comes to issues that should outrage us morally. Being spiritual is not just being mystical. This is an important thing to say on a beautiful island like Maui. I'll say it again. Being spiritual is not just being mystical. Mysticism is the love dimension of spirituality. It is about being a lover and knowing the beloved, heart to heart, and pursuing the beloved and yearning for the beloved. But spirituality is also about being prophet. It is about defending the beloved, rising up against forces that endanger what you cherish. If you people are truly in love with and not just using, if you are in love with the land and the waters, the soil, and the beings, the creatures of your islands, then you will struggle with those others who want to defend them. And that is equally a part of spirituality, that prophetic work of liberation. In my book on the reinvention of work that came out a couple years ago, I talk about how we have to liberate work itself. Because our work, all of it, and I mean work as a teacher, work as a theologian, work as a banker, work as a lawyer, work as a farmer, work as an artist, work as a minister or priest or rabbi, work as parents and grandparents, all of our work has been polluted and tainted by the same forces that are polluting and tainting the rest of our environment. Work is an environment. And we are not spiritual until our spirituality regenerates our work. This is where the rubber hits the road. Meister Eckhart put it this way. He said, a person works in a stable. The person has breakthrough, meaning spiritual awakening. What do? They return to the stable. So when you have spiritual awakening, you go back to work and reinvent it and raise questions about it or do it newly. The most practical question I put about reinventing work is this: what joy does your work bring to you, and what joy does your work bring to others? Joy is always a test of spirit, because joy is a gift of the Spirit. And it is what the heart is made for. The heart responds to joy. And for many people today, joy is not touching the heart. I mean, work is not touching the heart. Therefore, there is little joy there. When you go back to work Monday, first question to ask over lunch or coffee break or whatever it is, where's the joy here? How can it be reintroduced? And who's profiting, joy-wise, from this work that we do? Now, when I have gotten into this issue of work today, one conclusion I've come to is this: what do all these workers, professional workers, have in common? The lawyers, the bankers, the healthcare operators, the politicians, the teachers, the clergy, they all have in common is something called university. University is the funnel through which we pass our workers in our culture. So many of them. So many of the decision-making workers. I have come to the conclusion that our universities are not just funnels, but are strainers. In many cases, they strain the soul out. Gloria Steinem says it took her 22 years to get over her college education. You know, when I was on a book tour with my Reinventing workbook 2 years ago, I just happened to quote that line at a university I was in Massachusetts, and it turned out to be her alma mater. I had no idea in my naivete, thank heavens, that I was in her alma mater, and I quoted it took her 22 years to get over her education there at Wellesley College, I think it was. But this is why we started a university in creation spirituality in downtown Oakland. This September we started it, because I think it's time to reinvent university. And first of all, bring the universe back. Not a bad idea, it's pretty basic. Is that it's seldom there. The university began in the 12th century. It was the last time that the goddess was roaring through Western civilization, was the 12th century. And she brought with her creativity and a sense of cosmology, Sophia, wisdom, and universe. And that's when university was launched. But since then we've done this anthropocentric trip, especially during the modern era, on university, and now it's a parts thing. Sociology part, religion part, history part. And it's more text-oriented than context-oriented. So in our university, you enter, you go up this long staircase, and along the staircase we painted the history of the universe. We begin with the fireball, and it's scientifically accurate, proportionately, 15 billion years, so about 2/3 of the way up the staircase the solar system comes. And then at the very top, 1/16 of an inch, there's a strip of purple color. That is humanity. It's absolutely accurate. It's the context. You go up this long staircase, where humanity's at the end. And as far as your particular religion goes, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, whatever, that's like a speck of dust in that purple strip. They're a few thousand years old. And we're killing each other in our denominational idolatry? Ridiculous. If we get it back in context, so much can happen. At our university, we started we're beginning a program in January called Doctor of Ministry, and it's all about work and spirituality. Now, up to now, Doctor of Ministry degrees have been for clergy or theologians, but we're doing something very different. We're saying every worker today yearns to connect spirit and work, and are doing it in their work, whether they be artists or healthcare providers or therapists or business people or clergy and so forth. Why shouldn't there be doctors of ministries for all workers? And our program is to keep you in your work and in your community, that program, so you just come in for a few week intensives each year, but you stay in your community, putting the new cosmology and putting spirituality back into your work. So what we believe is that a university in a postmodern era will be small. It will be small. So faculty and staff and students together can pray together, eye to eye. They can dance together and can debate together and can learn together. Last night, in fact, was the end of our first semester, and we had this beautiful ceremony beginning with Hanukkah candle celebration, chanted by two rabbis, a woman and a man. Then following with the reading, yesterday was the Guadalupe feast day of Our Lady of Guadalupe, so we celebrated this new book out on the Guadalupe as goddess, and we had readings from some of the authors of that book. And then we went into our sacred cave, we call it. We don't call it a chapel, but a sacred cave, this dark space room in the middle of the university. And we chanted together a 12th century Ave Maria that's very beautiful from the goddess times of Christianity. And then we paraded, we had made a plaque to Our Lady of Guadalupe because Teresa Incola Estes and her organization of Guadalupe gave us a $10,000 grant. So we made this plaque in her honor and to dedicate it to the lobby, the Guadalupe lobby, and we paraded around singing this 12th century chant. And it was such a moving experience that, yes, it's time for a university of spirituality. Why isn't it? Why aren't there 1,000 of them? Because we are in these critical times of great darkness, such as the Roman Empire provided 2,000 years ago when Jesus was born. We are in a time of great darkness, an extinction spasm, and we have to go to the best that humanity has to offer. And that, I think, means our wisdom traditions, our spiritual traditions, and it's not about going there to get stuck in our left brains and intellectualize. I mean going there with our hearts and our minds and our bodies. I mean praying together. The best that Christianity has to offer, yes, its mystics and its prophets. And the best that Buddhism has to offer. And the best that the indigenous people have to offer. And even then, as Thomas Perry warns, it will not be enough just to gather the nuts like squirrels from the religions of the past. We must create a new thing with it. That should be easy for us because we are creative beings. We love to create. We love to recycle. Once we get off our couches from our depressions and our despair and our loneliness, You know, what we call couch potatoitis today, the medieval theologians called acedia, A-C-E-D-I-A. It was a sin of the spirit. And Aquinas says acedia is a refusal, the lack of energy to begin new things. It's a refusal to be creative because we don't have the energy for it. It's cynicism. It's just what we're getting in the media 24 hours a day. Cynicism is acedia. It's a sin of the spirit. And it can only be broken through with the gift of awe and wonder and cosmology and spirit. And let me say one more point then on this subject of renewing education and religion, that worship is an integral part of it. And this new generation, I believe this first generation of postmodern young people, people who realize they don't have promises for long-term jobs, they are looking at something else. They're looking to the gift of celebration. And there's a lot of celebrating going on among a lot of young people today because they're getting more mystical. They realize we have to live in the now. Live in the now and work for the future. That morality is about what we are doing to the next 7 generations. And so to gather the wisdom of the young people, what we need today is intergenerational wisdom. The wisdom of the elders and the wisdom of the young people coming together to give birth. The wisdom of all world religions coming together to give birth. Birth to a new version of humanity. Not unlike that pronounced by the prophet Isaiah when he said, we are here to liberate the captives, to see that the blind see and the lame walk, and that the poor are reminded of their dignity. So these are a few of my thoughts as we gather this evening in this sacred place, in this special time, this special season, but also this special time in the history of our planet, in the history of our species. It is a turning time. It is a time for choices. It is not business as usual, education as usual, religion as usual. It is not that kind of time. It is an amazing time in which to be living, whether we be in our 20s or in our 70s. We all have a contribution to make. You take this 15-year period that Lester Brown says we have, meditate on that in this fashion. Add 15 years to your age today. If you're 40, think about being 55 and think back to today. What gifts do you have? What calling do you have? What connections do you have to make your contribution to moving from text to context, from machine to green, from modern to postmodern, from moving from the Industrial Revolution to the Environmental Revolution, from moving to a time of spirit. Let me close with a story that came my way the last time I was in Hawaii. I lectured on a different island, can't remember which one right now. And afterwards, this man came up, young man, 30. He said, I'm from Boston. And he said, I have a story to tell you. He said, a year ago, I was diagnosed with AIDS. And that evening, I had a dream, and you came to me in my dream. You're wearing a white lab coat like a doctor. And you said to me, PWA does not mean a person with AIDS. PWA means a person wanting attention. And he said, I meditated on that dream very deeply. It's very important to me. And I left Boston and moved to Hawaii. I was giving myself attention. He said, for the first time in my life, I really started caring for my own heart needs and emotional needs. And moving to Hawaii was the beginning of that. He said, now I'm feeling very strong, I'm very joyful, and I'm ready for the journey. I think that dream is what Native Americans would call a big dream. I don't think it was his private dream. I think there's something there for all of us. And I changed the language a little from PWA to SWA. I think we are a species wanting attention today. During the modern era, we have given our attention to many other things other than our hearts, other than our relationship to all things. We have given our attention to tearing down forests and shipping out gold and sending soldiers and sending missionaries. We've been doing a lot of stuff and digging for knowledge, building computers to hold all the knowledge that we found, fine. But we are a species needing attention. The attention we need is a kind of attention that is alluded to in the story of Christmas. It's alluded to in the story of Hanukkah. It's alluded to in the pagan celebrations of the turning from darkness to light at this time. And I think then that in that context, there is good work for all of us, work at making all happen, and work at liberation. Thank you. The cynicism of adolescence. Well, first of all, the adults have to do something about the cynicism in them. We need spiritual practice. As I said earlier, we are inundated. Our environment is cynical because the media is so profoundly cynical, and the media for so many in our culture is our environment, or a big part of it. So I really think we need to do rituals, cleansing rituals. We need to do spiritual practice. Of course, here in Maui, you have many opportunities just to be in nature, and that itself is a spiritual practice if approached that way. I also think study is a spiritual practice that we have to get back to. As I said, we separated learning from education. But again, one of the deep contributions of Jewish spirituality is that Torah, the doing Torah, is prayer. So to study is to pray. If you do it with your heart and not just your head, or not just to get a degree or impress someone or get power. You see, you have to go into your intention and your motivation, make it pure. And this is part of my tradition as a Dominican too, that we were taught that to study is just as important as to chant the divine office. It too is prayer. And I think that we have to get back to that idea, that study is one form of spiritual practice. This creates a very important discipline, and is very, I know some of the most ecstatic times of my life have been in studying, or in writing, or in reading. Now, so the first point I make about your question, how to clean up the cynicism in the young people, is that we have to clean up our own cynicism. Because you can't teach about spirituality. It's not a series of concepts, essentially. It's life attitudes and life practices. You have to be doing it. As Eckhart says, worry less about what you do and more about who you are. So it's about dealing with our own being. Then to look to young people, talking with them and finding where their joy lies and where their real power lies. One thing we want to do at our university is to have a youth center connected to it. And what we're going to do in the youth center is not that different from what we do in the university at the level of the art is meditation. So we'll have a Tai Chi, we'll have Aikido, we'll have mask making and painting as meditation, which is what we're doing with the adults. And we'll have computer graphics and computer art for these young people, encouraging them to give birth to their images. A multimedia center where they can contribute to creating rituals for the greater community. The young in our culture are rendered so, what should I say, so often they're rendered quite useless. That we keep them, in effect, passive until they're about 27, and then it's too late. And we have to invite them to lead. And like I alluded to earlier, I think that this young generation has something to lead us in terms of the new technology, a postmodern language for doing ritual and worship in. So we've been doing these, what some people call rave masses, but are really postmodern masses where we do use rave music and dancing, trance dancing, and the multimedia. And we did one around the theme of the sacredness of the body, and we also did that one on the road. We took it to a convention of 400 doctors in Philadelphia this summer, and we had 400 doctors dancing, trance dance, rave music,
with the organs of the body all around them and screens and on the ceilings. And I mean, you know, I try to practice what I preach. If you're going to wake the workers up, you got to go to the doctors' conventions and do things like this. Now we've been invited to a nurses' convention this summer, do the same thing. But after this one ritual with the doctors, one of them came up to me with very glassy eyes and he said, "Do you do this for lawyers too?" Yeah, lawyers, everyone's invited to our cosmic masses. That's what we call it, techno-cosmic masses. We do them, we've been doing them in Jerry Brown's auditorium about a mile from where our school is in downtown Oakland. Jerry Brown, who's on our board and is part of our faculty, in fact, he says if we can save Oakland, we can save the country. The whole move from Holy Names College, where we were up in the hills of Oakland, down to the flats, down to downtown Oakland, has been a very conscious move on my part, because I feel that we're at a critical time, especially around young people and their grief and their despair. And if spirituality is real, it ought to be able to serve the real issues of our time, and not just hide out where there's a great deal of comfort or beauty by itself. We have to be challenging ourselves. So I feel that that the young are so desperate that they're ready for spirituality. And the fact is the whole species is desperate, but not all of it is aware of how desperate it is. I think that's what spirituality is about. It's about dealing with these basic issues. Why are we born? As I talked about this evening. So I think those are a few thoughts that I would offer. And what we want to do is have a youth center open from about 3:30 in the afternoon to about 9 or so, because of this after school time is when young people are looking for something. And I think that true ritual is so interesting, and especially when you connect it to today's technological language, which the young people have at their fingertips. They're much more at home with computers and graphic art and computer art than I am. And so it's easy for them, and they could be leaders. And that's what we do. It's interesting, in our techno masses, I'd say about a third of the people who come are young. And many of them are in leadership positions, doing the DJing, for example, the music and stuff, and then creating the altars and all this. But 2/3 are middle-aged and older. So this is what I meant by intergenerational wisdom. We need one another. And so that's something I highly recommend. So we're trying to rejuvenate worship in a deliberately postmodern fashion. Put down the books, get out of the pews, and start dancing. Because dancing is the oldest way to pray. It's also the surest way to breathe. And all prayer is about breathing. It's not about reading. It's not about text. See, that's the modern prejudice. Well, what prayer is about, that is about being read to or reading, that is so narrow. You go to a sweat lodge, and I assure you, there's no place to read. You've got to pray, and it's about survival. You got to get into your stuff and put it out there. And this is what I think worship has to provide. It's not the only form of a mass, the only form of liturgy, but I think it's an essential form that we be doing, taking this new language of technology and using it for the sacred. Has God allowed these amazing instruments to be invented in the last 25 years in this postmodern time? Remember, the modern age collapsed in the 60s. That's what was going on then. The modern age ended, and then postmodern began with the emergence of the electronic media, that we moved from text to images again. And that's postmodern. Now, has all this amazing discovery and invention in the last 25 years just been to balance the books of our insurance companies more effectively, or to create more entertainment until our country is ODing on entertainment? Do we really need these theater complexes after theater complexes of 12 new theaters every place? Or do we need ritual centers, which are participatory, where we can deal with our grief? A lot of young people are angry today and are showing it in violence toward themselves and toward others because they are in grief. And our culture, including our religions, especially our religions, no longer have the means to lead us into grief work. We can go back to our more pre-modern forms of worship and find them. The drumming, the dancing, the wailing, the keening. All of our technomasses include the via negativa, the grief work. And there's something when you don't have to say much at all. When you put on the pictures of the pollution of our land and of our forest, the wiping out of our forests and so on, you can get people into grief real fast through images. But then you better know what you're doing in terms of helping them to go into that anger, the first level of grief, then into the sorrow, the second level of grief, and then into the bottoming out, the third level of grief. Until we can deal with grief as a culture, we will not deal with racism. I think one reason we've come up against the wall on racism is that laws, civil rights, and laws can only do so much about racism. The deeper issues are heart issues, and they are about asking for forgiveness, and they are about forgiving, and they are about starting over in our relationships. So many of the most profound issues of our time need to be approached through ritual. Because one of the saddest inheritances of the modern age has been to isolate us. You know, we had a physics for 300 years that said that the building blocks of matter are rugged individual atoms, like billiard balls that bump up against each other and are pushing each other on to get their own space. Well, that physics has changed totally. That physics is dead. It's a mistaken view of the world. Thomas Aquinas says a mistake about nature results in a mistake about God. That's how important science is. And so the shift from rugged independence to interdependence, to realizing, hey, even atoms survive by gathering together and creating community. That's how an atom survives. By becoming a molecule, then molecules survive by creating little communities that we call cells. Cells survive, we get together and create organisms. That's how it is, folks. It's about community building. The modern age has been anti-community, and so the very meaning of ritual has become trivialized. So, in fact, it's inherent to humans. Ritualism is basic to us as eating and drinking and sex. And as I say to people today, it's safer and cheaper than any of those. So we ought to start investing in it, given what's going on in our time. And it's so needed. Because it's in community ritual that the community finds a common voice. It finds its many gifts. It finds its sorrow and its grief, and therefore its empowerment. Only through going the via negativa, only going into the darkness, do we come out creative. And creativity is really, it seems to me, the only thing the human race has going for it.